Death is supposed to be the end of a story, but for Julie Mott, it was only the beginning of a mystery. In August 2015, the 25-year-old passed away after a lifelong battle with cystic fibrosis. Her family gathered to say their final goodbyes. After the memorial service, her remains were left inside the funeral home, awaiting cremation 2 days later. Everything seemed normal until the next morning, when employees opened Julie's casket and it was empty. Her remains were gone. There were no signs of forced entry. The alarm had never gone off. And more than a decade later, no one knows what happened to her remains. This is one of America's strangest unsolved mysteries. Julie Nicole Mott was born on August 15, 1989, in Fort Worth, Texas. She was the daughter of Tim and Charlotte Mott. She had a younger brother, John, who she stayed close with throughout her life. But when she was just 2 years old, Julie was diagnosed with a rare genetic disease, cystic fibrosis. The condition causes thick, sticky mucus to build up inside the body, gradually damaging the lungs and other vital organs. Even today, there is still no cure. For most patients, it means a lifetime of treatments and a life expectancy far shorter than most. For more than 20 years, Julie lived with the disease. Hospital visits, treatments, medications, medical appointments. These became part of her everyday life. But according to her family, Julie never allowed her illness to define who she was. At just 7 years old, she discovered a passion for horses. By 9, she was taking English riding lessons. Soon after, she was competing in horse shows and show jumping events. She had a horse of her own, named Benny, who she loved deeply. Even as her body continued to battle the disease, she worked hard to build a life centered around the things she loved. On August 8, 2015, exactly 1 week before her 26th birthday, Julie passed away peacefully in her sleep at her home in San Antonio. She was only 25 years old. For her family, her passing was heartbreaking, but it wasn't entirely unexpected. For years, they had stood beside Julie through every stage of a disease that had no cure. Now, they wanted to honor her final wishes. Julie had asked to be cremated, so her family arranged a memorial service for August 15, 2015. Family, friends, and everyone who loved Julie gathered together to say one final goodbye. It would become the beginning of one of America's strangest unsolved mysteries. On August 15, 2015, exactly 1 week after Julie's passing, family and friends gathered at Mission Park Funeral Chapels North in San Antonio, Texas. Julie's memorial service was held with an open casket. One by one, those who loved her approached the casket for the last time. The service began at 1:30 in the afternoon and ended a short time later. As the guests slowly left the funeral home, it seemed as though the story had finally come to an end. In accordance with Julie's final wishes, she was to be cremated. Following the memorial service, her casket was moved to a private visitation area in the back of the funeral home, where her remains would stay until her cremation 2 days later. It was a routine procedure, one performed by funeral homes every single day. Nothing about it seemed unusual. By 4:30 that afternoon, the funeral home locked its doors for the day, just like it always did. What no one knew was that sometime in those 3 quiet hours, between the last goodbye and the locking of the doors, something almost unimaginable was quietly unfolding. The following morning, August 16, 2015, an employee walked into the private area where Julie's casket had been placed. Everything appeared completely normal. The employee approached the casket, opened the lid, and immediately realized something was terribly wrong. Julie was gone. The casket was still there. One of its hinges had been broken. Nearby, the bier, the wheeled stand used to move a casket, was found overturned near an exit. Investigators would later describe its position as unnatural. At first, employees wondered if there had simply been a mistake, that her remains had been moved elsewhere inside the funeral home. They searched every room, every hallway, every place her remains could possibly have been taken. But Julie was nowhere to be found. Police were called to the funeral home, and what they found only deepened the mystery. There were no signs of forced entry, no damaged doors, no broken windows, and the funeral home's security alarm had never been triggered. Because of that, investigators reached an unsettling conclusion. This likely didn't happen overnight at all. If someone had broken in after closing, the alarm would have gone off, which meant Julie's body was most likely taken in broad daylight. sometime in those 3 hours between the end of her service at 1:30 and the locking of the doors at 4:30, while the funeral home was still open, while staff were still inside, someone had walked in, removed a body from a sealed room, and walked back out in the middle of the afternoon without a single person noticing. San Antonio Police Sergeant Javier Salazar, a 22-year veteran of law enforcement, put it simply, "I have never in 22 years in law enforcement ever heard of anything like this." News of Julie's disappearance spread quickly throughout San Antonio. For Julie's family, the grief of losing their daughter had barely begun. Now they were facing an entirely different nightmare. They had simply wanted to give Julie a proper farewell. Instead, even her remains were gone. Police quickly launched an investigation. Because there was no body and no evidence of violence, the case was initially opened as abuse of a corpse, a Class A misdemeanor under Texas law. But investigators treated it with the seriousness of a homicide case. Every part of the funeral home was examined, every employee interviewed, every guest from the service questioned. No lead was considered too small. Searches soon expanded beyond the funeral home. Vacant lots, wooded areas, roadways, every place Julie's remains might have been hidden. But every search ended the same way. Nothing. There were no eyewitnesses. No surveillance footage showing anyone leaving with Julie's remains. Hoping someone would come forward, Mission Park Funeral Chapels offered a $20,000 reward for information leading to the recovery of Julie's remains. Owner Robert Dick Tips, a longtime family friend, was devastated. His was a business that had served San Antonio for 5 generations. Nothing like this had ever happened before. Despite nationwide media coverage and numerous tips from the public, the investigation made little progress. Weeks passed, then months, then years. Julie's remains were never found. With the case at a standstill, detectives turned their attention to the people closest to Julie. One person soon stood out. His name was Bill Wilburn, Julie's former boyfriend. According to a police incident report, Wilburn had been invited to the service and was the last person to leave the funeral home that day. Investigators said he had been obsessed with Julie, repeatedly calling and texting her in the time before her death. After her remains disappeared, his behavior escalated. According to reports, he called the funeral home more than 200 times in a single day. Employees described him as increasingly erratic. He kept returning to the funeral home, trying to get inside. In September 2015, just weeks after the disappearance, the funeral home issued him a formal criminal trespass warning. He did not stay away. In June 2016, surveillance cameras installed specifically because of Wilburn caught him entering the property twice. Staff called the police. In February 2017, he was arrested and charged with 2 counts of criminal trespassing. The following month, after he was caught on camera returning again, despite the warning, a judge ordered him to wear a GPS monitor. Investigators also obtained a warrant to collect a DNA sample from him. Wilburn was never named an official suspect, but police never cleared him either. When he told a local reporter he was no longer a person of interest, San Antonio police publicly disputed that claim. In a 2018 interview, Wilburn denied any involvement in Julie's disappearance. He said returning to the funeral home was simply his way of grieving, that he couldn't accept she was gone. The fact that the funeral home is still hoping that I'm going to be their scapegoat at this point is incredibly sad, Wilburn told reporters. To this day, no charges related to Julie's disappearance have ever been filed against him. There is no physical evidence linking him or anyone to what happened to her remains. While police searched for Julie's body, her family turned to the courts. In January 2016, the Motts filed a lawsuit against Mission Park Funeral Chapels and owner Dick Tips, seeking more than $1 million in damages. The suit accused the funeral home of gross negligence, stating plainly that Mission Park had lost possession of Julie's body and could not explain how. The lawsuit exposed troubling gaps in the funeral home's security and its handling of remains left in its care. But it answered a different question than the one everyone wanted answered. It was about accountability, not about who took her. Nearly a decade later, theories still circulate. Some believe grief and obsession drove someone to take drastic action, unable to accept that Julie would be cremated. Dick Tips himself once suggested the culprit may have been someone who didn't believe in the cremation process versus a traditional burial process. Others have raised the possibility that something went wrong during the handling or transport of her remains, and that afterwards someone chose to cover it up. Some also wonder whether someone inside the funeral home itself was involved in some way, allowing the body to be moved out without tripping the cameras. But that too remains completely unproven. None of these theories have ever been confirmed. None of them have led investigators to Julie. Julie Mott's remains have never been found. No one has ever been arrested in connection with her disappearance. The $20,000 reward has never been claimed. Bill Wilburn has never been charged with anything beyond trespassing. He maintains his innocence to this day. For Julie's family, there has been no cremation to grieve, no grave to visit, no remains to lay to rest. Just an empty casket, a broken hinge, and a question that has gone unanswered for almost 10 years. Who steals a body, and why? Somewhere, the answer exists. Julie Mott's family is still waiting for it.